All right. We're so happy to be joining you on this Friday. Hello, LinkedIn. Hello, healthcare. Hello, YouTube. We have an awesome guest for you this week. And the reason if you've seen Alan Shoebridge posting on Twitter, LinkedIn, or his blog, you just notice that it's a constant source of learning the latest and the greatest in healthcare marketing. Basically, Alan is constantly looking at what's going on in the cutting edge, looking at the later technologies and approaches, and using that in the field, and then writing about it, getting that information back to you. I don't know about your schooling, your college, and everything like that, but way back in 2003, there were no healthcare marketing offerings. As a matter of fact, healthcare marketing was relatively new at that time, not something that really came to be until the 1980s. So there's a lot of history that we're making right now. And the fastest education is from the people that are doing it. And Alan Shoebridge has done a lot. We're really excited for, we'll go a little bit into his history and present state. He's spent a lot of time at Kaiser Permanente and is now at Salinas Valley leading marketing efforts. And the reason we were first excited about bringing him on was just that with all the channels that you're hearing about video, podcasting, and everything like that, he's out there doing it. So it's not just a theoretical concept. We can get into what's working for patients, how to coordinate across all these various channels. While this conversation is going on, again, we're focused on learning, we're focused on getting the latest information out there. But while the conversation is going on, be like Kathy Rhodes. Drop us comments, drop us hellos, or even questions. If there's things that you've been challenged with in the field, or questions that you have, or strategies that you just like to go back and forth, that's what we're here for. It's not just a presentation. There's no PowerPoint that we're clicking through. This is a conversation. This is we put this on so that you have the opportunity to meet and go back and forth with people who are leading the charge. So Alan Shoebridge, Sheetal Shah, he's our Chief Operating Officer and has a big focus on digital transformations in his career at top 10 health systems. So what we'll do, and hey Heather, good to see you here. What we're going to do, because not everybody in our audience is marketing. We have a diverse audience coming from engagement, IT, population health, etc. Andy Pollock, hello. Thanks for the shout out. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with the absolute basics. What we want to look at, like, with this diverse audience, is let's get a definition. Alan, what is marketing? Can you tell us what that is? We're going to go super basic here, and then we're going to build up from there on some of the later things that you've been doing.
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks for that introduction. I really appreciate it. And also, so I guess seems like a simple question, but not always a simple answer. And a lot of people have different definitions. I guess I would start by saying, hey, what is not marketing? I'm going to throw that out there first. Marketing is not sales. And marketing is not advertising. And I would say, if you ask the average person on the street, what's marketing? They're going to say it's ads. You run ads. I see an ad in the paper. I see an ad on TV. I see an ad on my phone. That's marketing. Well, that's not marketing. That's a tactic. And those are tactics, and that's important, but that's not marketing. So the way I would define it is, I'd say marketing is about building successful relationships. It's all about building a relationship. And you do that by kind of understanding, okay, what's our brand? That's where you start. You're like, what do we have to market? What do we have? What is our brand? What are our products? In healthcare, you're like, what are we offering? So you need to understand that. And then you need to understand how people think of your brand. Is your brand strong? Do people want to use you? And that'll help you really figure out, okay, if we're going to build some relationships, here's what people know about us. Here's our strengths and weaknesses. And here's how a marketer, here's how we start going about it. And I think that marketing really becomes, delivering a good engagement opportunity to the right person at the right time. And an engagement opportunity could be a live event. It could be an ad. It could be something on your phone. But again, it's the marketer's job to really figure out, who's our audience, what do they value, and then get to them at the right time. And I would say that's a long answer, but that's what it is. And again, if you want to simplify it, I'd say marketing is about building relationships that are kind of repeatable and sustainable over time.
I want to push back on you just a little bit. Sheetal,
yeah. Oh no, Chris, if you're going to push back, let's get going for a Friday here.
Okay. A Friday fight day. But really, my question. So it's about building relationships, but why in healthcare people already have relationships with their physicians and have trusted relationships with their organizations. Why is this needed in healthcare?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's funny. Anytime I run into someone, I got some relatives and stuff up in Canada, and they hear I'm a healthcare marketer, like, why does this need to be marketed? Well, in the United States, healthcare is a business. That's just a fact. That's what it is. And there's competition. There's attention for space. But I think why healthcare marketing is important is we still have a lot of people who they avoid healthcare. So they don't have a relationship with a primary care doctor. They put off healthcare too long. So I see in our piece, again, you're running a business. You got to have some things that are profitable to maintain. You hear the phrase, no margin, no mission, right? I mean, even for nonprofit, that's important. So again, we've got to figure out ways to help support the business because it is a business in many aspects. But again, there's an important piece of there are relationships we can build that will help improve healthcare in our communities. And that's been a huge emphasis for our healthcare system and all healthcare systems. Like, we need to make sure people are getting the care they need when they need it. And if we're not helping to try to put a message out there, you're right, Chris, a lot of people would go to the doctor anyways. But you probably have 30% of the community or more that would like, no, I don't need to go in for that checkup. I don't need that screening. So again, we're trying to build those relationships to make sure that, you get what you need. And then if you need something more advanced, we're here for you. But so I think there's a lot of space in healthcare for the marketing function. I mean, it's a lot different than, selling a car that is a totally, discretionary purchase for most people. Healthcare is different, and there's a lot we can do to help influence that.
Do you think, Alan, that providers have embraced marketing? Because in many ways, like you said, marketing's role is to help, build relationships. Right. And with COVID and the like, the providers we've seen, right, people aren't going to get their preventative health visits when they need to and the like. Do you think marketing's tactics, its technology can actually be an element of the clinical journey that a consumer goes through?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that a lot of healthcare systems are thinking about that. And I know we're thinking about that. I would say if you looked at 10 years ago, if you ask the average provider, a physician, what's marketing, they'd say advertising. They would start where we started the conversation today. They're like, oh, you run ads. I think today the switch has been flipped to talking about that engagement, talking about the relationship, and trying to figure out, again, how can we push out messaging and other things that helps people take action? So, we do a lot of thinking about, we've got a patient base in our CRM. Like, how do we send out messaging that might be important to them? So if we can dig into our CRM and say, wow, we've got people who, they really could use a visit with their cardiologist or a screening or whatever, and they haven't shown up in our system for 2 years, but they're at risk. Like, we can help push out a message. And, that's something, again, like 10 years ago, we're talking about advertising. Today, I think we're talking about, we're still talking about advertising sometimes, let's be honest, but we're also talking about how do we engage people? How do we help manage the population? And that's become really important. And marketers have a key role in that.
Alan, you've spent, I think, almost 11 years at Providence. You were at Moda. You were at Kaiser Permanente. You have an amazing set of experience here. Over the last decade, has marketing got easier or harder with the technology that's in play?
Oh, man, probably both to some degree. I mean, the thing is that, and I know we're talking about, the subject here is multi-channel, right? So the nice thing is there's more ways to get information to people than ever before, which is fantastic. But you do run the risk of sort of spreading things out really thin. So instead of before, you could go heavy on one thing and know that everyone's looking at that 1 or 2 or 3 channels. But today you might have 20. And again, are you spreading yourself too thin where you're not really making enough of an impact? And that becomes one of the challenges. I do think having access to the data, though, is fantastic. Like we were talking about before, basically every good organization, every good marketing team has a CRM in place where, again, they can drill down and use data that we could never have gotten before. And even things like you're looking at, well, we had a live event and we got, 100 people. What did they do? Did they actually go through the system? Did they get care? How do we follow up? No, we couldn't have done that 10 years ago, So we could have put on a great event. We could have done some great advertising, but we would have been totally guessing about, how many people actually used our services? What was the value? So I think the nice thing is the tools are great, but they do have the risk of distracting you and also making sure that, and potentially having you spread out messages so thin that you're not making enough of an impact. So that's something you have to look out for.
So that kind of leads to a question just for your response to the pandemic. So all there's the complex of having so many different channels and so many different tools to interact and engage, while some of the most challenging and mentally taxing thing to ever go on in people's lives was happening. So what that led to was a lot of organizations cutting back on communications and cutting back on outreach. But it's very apparent that Salinas Valley took the opposite approach. So just curious on why you and the team decided to ramp things up while the rest of the market was scaling back on outreach.
Yeah, well, I think, in terms of overall, I mean, healthcare as an industry, I think a lot of healthcare organizations decided, and we were one of them, like, we got to step up, right? So people need information, they're worried. What can we do to help them feel safe, help them feel supported? And also, I think just in the first couple of months, and still it's a problem today, there's a lack of like, where is the good trusted information coming from, right? So like, do we believe the CDC? Do we not? Like, there's this conversations that are happening today that would be unimaginable like a year ago. And I think we have a role as a trusted expert that is even higher than it's ever been. So I think from a philosophy, that was sort of how we came about it right away. Like, we're like, there's a gap in information that people have, and we need to help fill it. And what's the best way to do it? And I think I have a great team who really thinks about experimenting, and they looked at like you were saying up at the top, Chris, like, should we do more videos? Should we do podcasts? Should we what do we need to do to get the message out? And we really took on a lot of new things to get that message out. And our leadership was really supportive of that too. And it all started, frankly, too, with a lot more communication with our employees. So that was huge for us. And then everything we were doing for the employees, like, these are the same messages that honestly we need to get out to the community. So I feel like we knew there was a gap there that needed to be filled. And we also just embraced the fact that I think people trust their healthcare providers. Yeah. Let's leverage that. Let's make sure they get the information they need. So that's how we approached it.
There's a theme that you keep hitting on in terms of the trust of healthcare providers and the need for healthcare information. One big predictor of good healthcare status, or one of the biggest predictors of poor healthcare status, is poor healthcare literacy. And that comes into play significantly when people don't even trust the resources where the best information could come from. What our data is showing is that that click-through rates and engagement in email and other communications after the pandemic skyrocketed for healthcare communications coming out of marketing departments. So it kind of ties the marketing role back into a portion of care delivery, which is to help improve healthcare literacy and help people to make better decisions. So that's really exciting to me. So we understand why you decided to ramp things up and the story behind that. Could you describe the multi-channel approach that you took? And if there's any stories as far as engaging the physician outreach side too, or what you might have done with the physician community, that might be of interest as well. Kathy Rhodes had a great question on that. Yeah. So I'm wondering if that plays into the multi-channel strategy as well.
Yeah, and I'll just double down on one thing too. We really took sort of an inside-outside approach on our messaging. And so, I've had roles in both marketing and communications. Today, I have both things on my plate in terms of internal communications and marketing and community. Well, I don't know that I ever really saw how important it was to tie those things together until now. Whereas we're going to figure out, again, what sort of messages do our employees need to know? And then how do we get that out to the community? How to get it out to the physician? So, some really examples I'll throw out here. One, and you talked about reaching the physician audience, but like we have a really fantastic chief medical officer, infectious disease specialist. Well, he put together some updates and by video, and they weren't not anything super fancy, but this was something that we could actually get out to the physicians and say, here's what our healthcare system wants you to know about the latest on COVID. We know you're getting questions from patients. Here's a resource for you. We did things like that, worked really well. We also looked at it like, well, wait a second, this isn't overly technical. Like, we could get this out to our employees as a whole too. Like, let's share the update with our employees. And maybe if we cut this down a little bit, we can share it externally too. So we just take that inside out approach where, again, it's like, what do we need to communicate? Let's make sure the employees and our physicians are on board first, because honestly, anytime is important. But in terms of COVID, it's like, we need to make sure the employees know what the organization is doing. So if they get asked by a patient or a family member, they're solidly understand what the organization is doing. And then we cascade that message out to the whole community. And that's where we looked at, again, bringing in more tactics, upping our frequency. And that's the approach we took. And I would just stress for anyone, the connection between communications and marketing and something like this is super important. And I think it's something I in the past years, when you're just doing a regular campaign, don't think about, but it opened up a lot more ideas for me in the future that I think will be really important. And I think it's something that a marketer should take more stock in.
What would you say, so when launching these campaigns, and I'll dial back, we posted the interview that you did with Chris Beblo last week on the No Normal podcast, and you spoke about planning and communicating results. So the question that I have here is, what did you define success to look like from this ramp up in communications, and how did you get the buy-in to take an approach that other health systems simply weren't taking, or that a lot of other health systems weren't taking?
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, I mean, our leadership is really excellent. They're progressive. They wanted to get messaging out. They're not conservative. Our CEO is really focused on the community. So it was never any problem to get buy-in to do more. And so I think that was easy. So that part was pretty easy. In terms of understanding the impact, what we really felt like is we wanted to understand, like, is the information we're providing valuable? Is it helping your understanding? And so I'll break it down a little bit. So internally, we looked at our internal audiences, and we did some survey work. After the first couple of weeks of ramping up messaging, we were doing daily messages to our employees with updates on COVID. We did that for several months. We just actually ended that a little bit ago, and we're just doing more periodic updates. But we did surveys several times to say, like, has the information you've received helped your understanding of how our organizations responded? Do you feel more confident? So we had a series of questions, and for me, it was really important. Like, I want to see real high engagement on those questions. If the messaging we're putting out is not helping people understand what the organization is doing for our employees, that's a problem. Well, we saw, the responses, like, it was hitting the goals set, which were the goals were to, like, let's up the engagement with our audience internally, and let's have them have a really good understanding of what we're doing. Let's make them feel as good as they can about the situation, and all those measures hit really well. And we took kind of the same approach initially to external audiences. So we did something, we ramped up an email newsletter, we increased the frequency, put some survey work in there too. Do you feel more confident about the information you're getting? Do you understand what we're doing? What do you need? Like, we asked those questions. And then we also put a brand perception study in the market, and just got that back a little while ago, asking, again, is there enough information? Do you feel confident? So our goals were really to increase engagement and help people feel more confident in our response, and have, to take the safety measures that we're proposing, which are very simple, but take them seriously. And I think we hit all those markers that we're looking to do. That's fabulous.
I mean, being able to connect back the same tech stack to support internal communications, measure efficacy. I mean, that must have been great. How did that all connect? Like, were you able to do that off of the same, say, marketing automation platform? Were you guys looking at just survey data, or?
Yeah, we're still figuring out how to build, I think, a better connectivity, and especially internally. So internally, it's just old school. It's Outlook messages followed up by surveys. So online surveys. So for internal audience, kept it simple. And again, sometimes that simple stuff works, because you can get 200, 250 responses from your employees, statistically significant. You're good to go. On the other side, we do for our external, we have a CRM, we are able to do some more deeper things there. But again, we kind of just initially kept it simple. Surveys that we could field ourselves, send out the links, get results. And that was real, and I love the fact too that, with that size survey, when you're doing it yourself, you're seeing real-time results, you're seeing things come in. So I wouldn't say it was technically sophisticated, but it provided exactly what we needed.
That's great.
I always love to hear keep it simple type approaches that get people started, get you dabbling in the data or that type of experience, and then that informs a better decision when it comes to when it's time to scale that up. So,
I was just going to say, I always believe that get any results you can. So I know there's people maybe on this meeting or who are going to watch this, and they don't have a CRM, or they haven't quite made the leap, or they don't have as much automation as need. But there's still things you can do. I always think too, like, if you're doing marketing, even you could ask your clinic to, when they're answering the phone, track calls and ask people how you found out about you. Again, that's real old school if you don't have a CRM yet or whatever, but it's one way that you can get information. So I always think even just do as much as you can, try to push for results in any way you can. And for anyone who's, again, started making the leap to more sophisticated technology, just start there. Start somewhere asking for data, and I think you'll appreciate it.
Now, this is a rather lengthy question, but I love the direction that it's taking, which is to look at this multi-channel strategy, the planning that you engaged in, and what you're doing compared to the types of marketing activity that you're measuring. The big question here is, are you seeing as a result of these campaigns, are you seeing a shift in how you're planning marketing spend just based on like the activity that you're attributing by channel? Just wondering how you're measuring the success on each channel and how that correlates into spend strategy.
Yeah,
I hope I got the spirit of your question, Andy.
Yeah, well, I think overall, we're looking at things right now. So this is, and again, I realize that people in the country are in various states of like responding to COVID. So thankfully here, we've got a little bit of a step back. So we're able to take a little bit of time right now to actually look at all those channels and say, okay, what was really effective? What do we need to scale back a little bit? And we have scaled back a little bit on some things, just the frequency. And so right now, kind of entering that cycle of, most of us are probably planning for 2021. And I think now we're doing our process of like, let's look at all those channels and figure out, where we want to double down, maybe where we want to scale back. And that will help inform, I think, our plans. We are also, and I know that, next year is going to be challenging because I think you're going to have peaks and valleys, right? So I do encourage people right now to just start doing their planning for next year, lay out what you can, figure out your campaigns that you want to do, but then also have your strategy for like, well, if all of a sudden we've got to shut down elective surgeries again because COVID and the flu are really heavily impacting our community, here's our plan B. Like, I think that's super important right now to do. So to get as much planning as you can and figure out, again, what worked for you during COVID, what do you want to double down on and do as much as you can with. I know too, some people have had, reduced budgets. So again, you're going to have to be smart. But I think the key for next year is with the planning is really being flexible, looking at the results you're getting and not being afraid to cut something off. If you're like, this just isn't working and I want to figure out something else, I think you do it. But I think right now is the time. So fall, you got, basically October, November, and December, where maybe you'll have a little breathing room. I think now is the time to do that analysis and figure it out for next year.
Alan, you mentioned doubling down, and this was we were talking about this before we went live. You kind of wonder if this is the time to double down on what you were talking about at the very beginning about helping form those relationships, making the relationships you have already with your existing patients and the caregivers stronger. Do you think there's going to be a shift, or is this the time to double down on building stronger relationships with your patients versus, say, focus on net new patient acquisition, right? Which, like you said, there's going to be highs and lows next year.
Right.
What do you think about sort of investing in relationships right now with your patients you have already?
I think you need to do both. And I think you need to evaluate it depending on where your organization is. So, if you're an organization where you've bounced back 80, 90% of your volumes that you had before, especially by service line, maybe you're good. Maybe it is time to, like you said, like just focus on the relationships we had, get as much out as we can, and make that our top priority. I think if you're in a situation where you haven't bounced back, maybe your volumes are 50% still. Well, you're going to have to do some work there to support the business objectives. So I would say they're both really important. I think they can be done at the same time. And it's just figuring out which level you want to go to. What's more important for your organization right now? But I think the focus does have to be there. You can't neglect the existing relationships you have. So again, I think each person listening to this is going to figure out their own balance on that as far as where the organization's business priorities are. Because that's the other thing. I think it's really important for marketing to have that sort of conversation with leadership and their business partners. What's important? Where do we focus right now? Because if I'm off doing something that the organization says, wait a second, why are we doing this? Like, this makes no sense. Why are we putting service line marketing out in the community right now? We don't need it. Well, that's a huge disconnect. So I think you start the conversation, with your leadership, your business partners, and say, where are we at? Where's the business at? Where are the service lines at? and then figure out your right balance. So I think my advice would be think about both those things, but figure out where your priority balance needs to be and have that be part of your planning.
One thing that comes to mind is when we talk about the multi-channel approach and all the challenges that you're addressing for patients. One question that kind of comes to mind a little bit tangential to that is the focus on healthcare marketing in general. Earlier on in the conversation, you spoke about like you didn't say it's about acquiring new patients. You said it's about establishing relationships. Could you dig a little bit deeper into that as far as what you're seeing or your thoughts on marketing in healthcare and whether or not it's shifting from pure acquisition to engaging existing relationships?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say again, I think the mindset of most healthcare marketing professionals has shifted more into the long-term relationship. So, but those long-term relationships are built with people who are acquired as patients, as new patients, So my hoping is best case scenario is if we're acquiring new patients, they become as close to lifetime patients as absolutely possible. I mean, if we get them in the door in the primary care and they have a good experience in a specialist, like I want them to stay in our system. So, again, it goes back to what do you need? So some places have no capacity for primary care, right? So you can't market primary care because you can't get an appointment for 6 months. Well, that changes the focus a little bit. But, let's say your primary care door is wide open or very open, or there's capacity. Well, that's an opportunity to build relationships because honestly, every single person needs a primary care provider, right? So there's nobody who wouldn't benefit from having a primary care provider. So if we can start a relationship there, whether you're 30 years old, you're 40 years old, whatever, that's going to have a lasting relationship. So that becomes a lot of my focus is, again, where do we have opportunity through new patient acquisition to build relationships? But we also probably have an opportunity with our existing patients to nurture the relationship, make sure they're getting what they need. Because I think one thing that often happens is you have existing patients, but they don't know that they can stay within your system for certain services. Right. Sometimes providers are really good about referring within your system or whatever, but other times there's education that you need, like, hey, we just opened up a new heart facility, or we just opened up a new health and wellness facility. You got to make sure your existing patients know about those things to keep that relationship going. So I do think the mindset, again, has shifted from, okay, it's strictly tactical patient acquisition stuff, one and done, to a more long-term focus on a relationship. But I would say the acquisition is a key part of that because you can't build relationships with new customers if you don't have to ever go after them. So you have to do it at some level.
And are there metrics that help prioritize, like in terms of retention or risk of churn or anything like that? Are there metrics that you guys look at to determine what type of outreach to do given the relationship?
Yeah, that's always been really complicated to figure out, like, things like lifetime value. I know that we've made progress over the last few years in trying to determine that a little more. I mean, I think that that's something that we'll look at in the future of building, like probably looking in, and maybe it's something we do in our CRM where we're like, what's the share of patients that we've seen in the last 2 years or something, right? And we look at that share and we're like, okay, we're seeing that go up. So maybe that's a way. So I think that's an area of additional development. There may be people that are doing that now, but I think that's something that we need to look at and figure out. And again, it's probably some combination of looking at the touch points we did and the retention. Again, if we reached out, did we see these people pull up? Because there's a lot of people who have not had an encounter in 12 months or two years or something. You might look at those and say, well, of those people, 20% of them, we absolutely should have seen in the last 2 years what's going on, and look at that number and see how it moves. So that might be something that has some good exploration.
Is there any further thoughts on that, Sheetal?
No, I think Alan's thinking about it the same way. I think we're starting to hear from parts of the market the same concept. So, yeah,
and of course, given that people don't necessarily have a contract with an organization, they're not obligated to come at any kind of frequency. It does become a hard thing to predict. So Alan, just to finish off these thoughts, we're at the top of the hour, and again, we appreciate everybody who comes and shares questions and stories and sticks with us for this time. And I know that Alan appreciates that too, because he's everywhere on social media sharing these experiences and these learnings and this knowledge. So, Alan, I want to dig into kind of what's the theme of what you'd like for people to learn. What behavior are you seeing out there in healthcare marketing that you hope that your communications and all that change? What should people be coming away from this conversation expecting to change about what they do?
Well, a couple of high-level things I think about are really understanding what is likely behavior. So one of the things, and it's one of my pet peeves, is we do sometimes as healthcare marketers expect people, our patients, consumers, to treat healthcare like they would treat buying a washing machine or a computer or a car or whatever. And we don't think enough about the fact that for most people, they are not thinking about healthcare until they need it. No one is thinking about, very few. It's one thing if you're researching an orthopedic procedure and it's been a pain point for a while, whatever, that's one thing. But the average person is not sitting there going, gosh, where can I have a ankle surgery next year? Or if I fall down the stairs, where am I going to get? They're just not thinking about that. But we often assume that they are. So I think we need to approach whatever we do with them that, again, they may not have started thinking about us until they absolutely need us. Right. And what does that mean? And also just not expecting them to behave in the exact same way they would with other sort of products. So that's a mindset thing that I think healthcare marketers and people in healthcare need to work on a little bit. So again, we need to do a better job of offering more consumer-friendly tools and information. But let's just accept the fact that, again, they're not reacting to healthcare like they would other products. And also, I think that you have to realize how vulnerable people are when we interact with them. So again, and I use this example, a couple of years ago, it was cold and snowy in Portland, and I fell down and broke my ankle. And I, all of a sudden, even in being in healthcare for such a long time, you go to the ER, you're just trying to figure out, what do I do next? What do I need? I didn't spend any time shopping for ankle surgeons, that was just, all in 24 hours, it was okay, I might need to talk to someone. So again, I think we just need to remember that people are making decisions in a very vulnerable state, and let's be honest about what they need and don't need and think about it that way. And I guess one other thing, just a piece of advice, is just asking good questions. So when you're talking to your business partners, asking good questions about what you need to do from a marketing perspective. So again, things like, and these are very basic, but I have a series of questions I always ask, is there capacity? What's the patient experience like? So it's a complete error to market a service where people can't get in. That's a waste of money, and it's a waste of time, and it just frustrates people. It's a complete waste to market a bad experience. If people are going to get to experience and not like it, that's bad. Those things need to be fixed before you do marketing. So I guess I would say that's my biggest piece of advice is make sure you're asking the right questions to set you up for success, to set the organization up for success, and then also to make sure your people get a good experience. And you need to do that every time.
I'd like to encourage, just based on what you just said and that story that you brought up about asking the right questions, I think that you recently posted about that on LinkedIn, right?
Yeah, I've done that. Every year or so, I share something about, again, here's the questions you can ask, because a lot of new people come into healthcare, even experienced marketers. They're really great. They know tactical things, but they don't always know the pitfalls to look out for. And so I think it's important to do that. So yeah, I've shared those sort of questions. And again, I think I have 6 questions I ask, and I just basically ask them every single time.
I'm going to plug Alan. I'm going to plug your website for a second. If you go to alanshubridge.com, that's where I found them. Great content that you've linked there. Some great slides. I love the fact that you've distilled down healthcare marketing explained in 4 slides. And the questions that you have in there were really useful for our audience. So thank you.
I hope people can learn from my mistakes, because those are questions I didn't ask. And then after the fact, I was like, wow, I really wish I had asked that, because it would have saved me some constant, time and effort.
So I encourage everybody to keep the spirit of learning alive. If you didn't have the opportunity to read a healthcare marketing textbook in your time in college before it probably even existed, this is your time. Again, Alan puts out a ton of great information on Twitter, LinkedIn, and his website. I would encourage you to follow him, and keep following us too. If you want to be notified about these newsletters, these webinars and conversations that we have a really big goal to educate the market on data science and its applications in patient engagement. And we put out content, we put out new learnings and new conversations every week. And all you have to do is, if you go to our website and scroll down to the bottom, you can just throw your email address at us and we'll send you an update about that every week on a recurring basis. So we really appreciate that. Our conversation next week is going to be about the intersection of patient engagement and healthcare informatics. And the person that we got to communicate with about that is from Oregon Health and Sciences University, Dr. Bill Hirsch, who's actually one of the founding fathers of healthcare informatics and is constantly publishing information. He hits a lot on, hey, the very basic questions of what is informatics, what is artificial intelligence, what is data science. He hits on those basic questions and then builds those up into a cohesive story about the patient as well. So next week, come with questions or thoughts on how we bridge that gap between all this technology and data and how we build better experiences for patients. Any final thoughts, Alan or Sheetal?
No, I thanks everyone. I saw some great comments over there too. So this was fun, and yeah, just enjoy your weekend and try to do some planning over the next couple of months. I think you'll find it really valuable.
All right, fantastic. We're going to make this freely available on YouTube, so you'll have all the questions listed out where you can click and review any section that you want to easily. Appreciate you, Kathy, Andy, Mike, Heather. Mike, thanks for the comment on the laundry room. Sorry, I'm not in my studio today. I'm not fancy today. But anyway, with that, I hope you all have a great weekend.
Thank you all.